So with that, states have their own unique organizing conditions. One thing that's really important to understand is we're organizing a continent. And it's important to recognize that states and regions can have significant differences in terms of laws and geography and culture and history. This was really kind of brought into the forefront of my thinking in 2018 when I had the opportunity to meet a Green city councilor in Amsterdam, Ayman Nadif. And in our conversation, it just kind of was mentioned that she could be anywhere in her country in 2 hours on public transit. And that made me start thinking about the organizing conditions that we're dealing with here in the United States. And in central Illinois, I can barely get out of my own state in 2 hours, let alone, across the country. And we're not even going to get started on public transit as part of that key, right? But it's really important for us to understand this, right? When we see the success of green parties in other parts of the world, we really have to take into account their laws, right? Their electoral systems. If they have a parliamentary system that prioritizes collaboration and coalitions, or as opposed to our first past the post winner take all system, we've got to think about their organizing area and the demographics involved, because when we start thinking about those things in the United States, it really brings into picture the vast scale and scope of what we're trying to do, of what we have to do, right? We've got to organize against the climate crisis, whether that means fires in California or now Canada, or fracking in Pennsylvania. How these different things manifest in different locations is completely different. And that means we have to have this immense level of adaptability and collaboration and solidarity in supporting other areas and other Greens and other, independent socialists in their struggle. With those unique organizing conditions, we mentioned earlier ballot access, which is the process by which a candidate gets on the ballot. And the requirements vary from state to state, race to race. There are 51 different sets of election laws, 51 different sets of ballot access laws. The requirements, the deadlines, the standards, they all have to be identified. I remember in the beginning of the 2020 campaign, our ballot access team, had a spreadsheet. And I remember Howie saying, this is too big. It's hard to digest. But the reality was, that's just how it is, right? Things are so different. In an odd year like 2023 right now, in Vermont, we can get ballot access by having 10 meetings in 10 different communities. We have 10 caucuses. We elect leadership of those caucuses, and we're on the ballot in 2024, right? In Oklahoma, you got to pay $36,000 or something like that to get on, right? It's literally bribery. If we want to get on in somewhere like California, we have to have a threshold of registered voters and then also pass a threshold in statewide races. If we want to get on in, the two of us here, right? If you want to run for president and you need to get on the ballot in Pennsylvania, you've got to get 5,000 signatures. If you want to do the same in Illinois, you have to get 25,000 signatures, which we have to double to survive. So you've got to get 50,000 signatures in 90 days. If you want to get on the ballot in New York, where the Democrats hid in a COVID relief bill a law that a section that tripled their ballot access requirements. So while we were dealing with the COVID crisis, the Democrats in New York were attacking third parties and inserting it into their COVID bills. And what that led to in New York is that they have to collect 45,000 signatures. Again, we have to double it. 45,000 signatures in 42 days. And before the election, it was 15,000 signatures. The only other place that has ballot access laws like this is Russia, right? Every other major, country, every other, supposed democracy in the world, these numbers are just outrageous. There are places in Europe where we're talking literally 10 signatures will get you on the ballot. And it's not just for president, right? Here in my district, my largely rural district in central Illinois, if I want to run for Congress as a Republican or a Democrat, I've got to collect between 700 and 800 signatures in my district. To run as a Green, a Libertarian, and in any other third party or an independent, I have to collect 16,000 signatures in 90 days in a largely rural district. That's 22 times as many as they do. And so, ballot access is something that complicates our organizing, but it's also a key piece of how the Republicans and Democrats work together and collaborate to make sure that they are the only voices that are allowed on the ballot. And when you look at, approval ratings for both parties, they're abysmal. And rather than improving themselves, they're instead repressing third parties, making it harder for voters to vote, and using that as kind of a bludgeon to maintain their power despite their immense impopularity. And then with something like green registration, right? And this is something I've been kind of called out for, where someone said, well, show me your registration card that you're a Green. In Illinois, I am one of the, about half the states where there's no party registration. I literally cannot register as a Green. You cannot register as a Democrat. So if you meet an Illinoisan that says they're a registered Democrat or a registered Republican, they're lying. It's actually lying's hard. They don't understand how our electoral system in Illinois works. I wouldn't put it as malicious as lying most of the time. They just don't know. They assume because they always pull a Republican ballot in the primary and they always vote Republican or the same for a Democrat, that's what they are. But we don't have partisan registration, so you can't sign up, which means in Illinois and about half the other states in the nation that don't have partisan registration, it's all internal, and it makes it really hard for us to find our people.